When I wanted to be a mentor, I said, Mike, what can you tell me? What advice can you give to me? And he said, probably the best advice I can give to you as a volunteer, he said, is decide how much time you're able to give. I said, well, I've come to see Tim. She said, are you his mentor? I said, yeah, I am. And she said, and pointed her finger and said, well, when's he going to start making some money? I mean, for me, the top ones is that the first one is that the mentee chooses you. You don't choose the mentee. Richard Branson's Virgin organization, they have a entrepreneurship program. They have a rule, and that is you cannot be a mentor unless you either have been or you are an entrepreneur. And as well as training the mentors, we also train the mentees. And one of the things we've learned is that a mentee needs to be ready for a mentor. Not every mentee is ready. Sometimes we call it the no fault divorce. So if, for example, if it doesn't work out, it's okay to go to the mentoring coordinator, whether you're the mentor or the mentee, and say, I don't think this is going to work out. It's okay to do that.
So, good afternoon, John. It's great to be with you after our last catch up in the Global Youth Entrepreneurship Summit in The Hague. For me, it still seems like yesterday. So, how have you been doing since then?
Well, good afternoon to you, or good evening to you. I think it is Rashed
Yeah.
in Bangladesh. So, and it's a real pleasure to meet with you again. The Hague I thought was great. I mean, given COVID and the fact that we've not collectively, YBI has not collectively been back in the room together, I think it really did a great service for everyone. So people could experience conversation without doing it on Zoom, and they could be together. And I think everybody's benefited from that. Actually, I think it's given YBI and the members, it's given everybody a huge lift.
Yep, true, true. Now, it was extremely beneficial, or not just in terms of our networking, but also getting to know each other, then benchmarking what we are doing, what global trend has been. So it has been amazing so far, and really, I just wanted to thank you for being in my podcast. It has been really amazing to have you, and I just wanted to share a background with you. This is our fourth or fifth episode. So
Okay.
in the previous episode, the guest we had, that we had Bill Wallet from MIT.
Yes.
We had
Yeah.
one of social entrepreneurs from Bangladesh, and there are a few other people. So each and every one emphasized one common factor is that having a mentor, like the importance of having a mentor. So after
Mhm.
having that conversation with each of those amazing people, I just thought that I wanted you as my next guest, and here we are now. So would you please introduce yourself for our audience?
Yes, well, I'm John Cull. I'm a mentor with YBI. I'm a practicing mentor, but I'm also a mentoring consultant. So I help to teach the mentoring skills to our global network of mentors through the various organizations that are part of the YBI network. And I started my mentoring journey in 1998, when I was then at the age of 50, and it became an important milestone in my life, and a good reason to want to shift the things I was doing. I was working in management consultancy at that point, having had a kind of number of different jobs over the years, different careers, and I really wanted to do something very, very, very different, where it wasn't about doing some work, getting paid for it, but it was adding to that and continuing to do some work, and doing it as a volunteer.
Okay, so great. Yeah, and I remember in the summit you were awarded as the Lifetime Achievement Award for mentoring. So this was excellent. So you have been like helping us, the YBA members, for last 20 years in different capacity to develop the expertise and develop the different programs. So may I ask you, like, what inspired you to become a voluntary mentor and spend more than thousands of hours of your time in mentoring young entrepreneurs in developing different mentoring programs? So I just wanted to know
Yeah.
the why of your
Okay.
journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. As I mentioned, the age of 50 was a really important milestone, and I think if you backtrack from there, I'd had a corporate career with British Airways. I'd had a consultancy career with a brilliant organisation called Life Skills International, and also I'd run my own business after British Airways. I bought a rundown hotel, country house hotel, in a remote area of England called Dartmoor, one of the national parks, and ran that for 3 years. It was the first time I'd ever worked as an entrepreneur, working, for myself. And it was definitely the hardest work, the most challenging work, I think, because you're right on it as an entrepreneur. Every decision you make, has a huge impact, particularly in those early days around survival or not. And I remember being short of money early on. I don't think that's a kind of, I don't think that's I think many entrepreneurs would understand that. So I had 2 jobs. I had some consultancy work, and I was running the hotel, and had a small family. And all of a sudden, some of the money that I thought that I'd had, that started to run out because it was a seasonal business. And I did my best to come through that. And I just, and thinking back now, I just wished I'd had a mentor, somebody I could have shared that with, and maybe some of the decisions I might have taken, would have been very, very different. Particularly around the financial aspect of the business. I just didn't. I mean, some people are just brilliant on finance, and if I just had someone that could have helped me, particularly in conversations with the bank and so on, I think I might have had some different types of options. But that didn't happen. So you kind of in the end we sold the hotel. And fortunately we got out of it okay. I was able to survive, and then I built up my own consultancy business until it came to a point, when I wanted to be a volunteer mentor. And the reason that came about was that I've got 2 sons who are both really, really dyslexic. I mean, there are some great entrepreneurs who are dyslexic. The famous Richard Branson is dyslexic. We have a great cook in this country called Jamie Oliver, who's built up a publishing, he's just terrific on TV. He's built up his publishing company, very talented. He's dyslexic, and these guys are, they're just brilliant role models. I'm not dyslexic, but my sons are. And so at school, they really struggled, really struggled, because a lot of what was happening at school, understandably, was, you have to kind of follow the academic routes, the syllabus that's there. And so they struggled and needed extra support. And then they went out into the world of work. And as a parent, I just thought, my goodness, I'm so much concerned, thinking, how are they going to survive? How are they going to make that? Fortunately, now they're both very successful entrepreneurs in their own right, and so they taught me an awful lot about some of the challenges that young people face. So when I started my mentoring, I wanted to find somewhere where I could connect with, I suppose, with young people like Tom and Bill, my sons, who also had challenges. That they wanted to be entrepreneurs. They had a passion for turning a business idea into something sustainable, and something that they could, where if they were successful, they could then employ others. And that's where I wanted to work. I didn't want to work in, with people necessarily who were going to make it anyway. I wanted to work with those that, that really had to kind of take it on, as my sons did. And there was an organization in the UK called the Prince's Trust. And that was, and in fact, YBI had a connection with the Prince's Trust all those years ago, 23 years ago. So I started my work with the Prince's Trust, and my first mentee was a young lady called Sue. I'll never forget Sue. And she was a designer. She was a clothes designer, but she had her, if my kids were dyslexic, she had a severe hearing disability. Absolutely, and so a funny story about Sue was that when she was studying, and she was very talented as a clothes designer, and the kids at school used to call her Deafy, which is not very nice. And so she put up with this for a little while, until one day she found the ringleader and went and punched the ringleader on the nose, and then they started calling her Tuffy, and she liked to be known as Tuffy, and she had a big grin when she told me this particular story, and I thought, wow, she's somebody I really want to work with here. So Sue was my first ever mentee, and I learned such a lot from Sue, because I had to kind of not think about the world through my eyes, but very much connect with Sue and the challenges that she was facing. So there's a little bit about how I got started in mentoring.
That's quite an inspiring story. I didn't know. So, apart from Sue's story, is there any other stories that you still share? Is that I would like to say probably some of the most fulfilling stories of your voluntary mentoring that you still probably share with your kids, probably or other people?
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is that, I at the time of mentoring, I also had a mentor. He was a brilliant guy called Mike. He sadly died during COVID, and he taught me such a lot, because when he retired from his company, he and in fact it was Life Skills, the company I work for. He went to work for Cathod in Africa, and it's something he wanted to volunteer, so he went to work on a leadership program, teaching leadership skills in Africa. And when I wanted to be a mentor, I said, Mike, what can you tell me? What advice can you give to me? And he said, probably the best advice I can give to you as a volunteer is decide how much time you're able to give. And, you've got your job, and how much time you're really able to give. And so I really thought about this, and I thought, well, okay, given, as a freelance consultant, I would, if I did a day's work with a client, I would bill that day's work. And so I worked out how many billable days I was delivering every year. And then I decided that I would take 10%, I would allocate 10% of my fee work, as it were, and apply that as a volunteer. And that was always my thing, so that when I joined the Prince's Trust as an organization, and they said, well, how much time have you got? And I said, do you know what? I can give you 10% of my work time. And they said, great. They knew where they stood. That really, really suited me. And I think that kind of arrangement worked well. And then, interestingly, when I started to develop training programs and teaching mentorship, then we came to different arrangements. That was outside my voluntary 10%, and then we had some other arrangements, and those relationships worked extremely well. But you did ask about other. So around this time of in my 10%, I remember another young mentee, and you know, he was a graphic designer, and this young guy, he had his studio at his home, and you know, because that way he saved some money, and I remember going to see him one day. You know, we were encouraged to go and see people at their place of business. Now, you know, when it's somebody's home, that, you know, I've got to say that in terms of the ethical side of mentoring, we have to be very, very careful where we meet our mentees, and I think you would know this. However, he was living with his parents, and I remember going round there, and instead of this young guy meeting me on the doorstep and taking me to his studio, his mother opened the door, and his mother said, I said, well, I've come to see Tim. She said, are you his mentor? I said, yeah, I am. And she said, and pointed her finger and said, well, when's he going to start making some money? And I thought, well, you know, which really took me back, because I thought, I'm not sure that's my responsibility. And what she was really saying was that they weren't a very, you know, they didn't come off from a, you know, they weren't a rich family, and so they put all their money to. He was the first of the children that had gone to university, and of course they thought university was going to open up this huge world, and you get this fantastic job, and then he'd repay the parents, and everything would be great. And so, but that didn't happen. And so, but what did happen in our relationship and our mentoring was that Tim worked out that actually he didn't want to be an entrepreneur at all. You know, he was a good graphic designer, but he didn't really want to have to go out and sell, you know, to sell his design work. And so, and he was designing for the greetings card market, and he did well when he was at university. He had a commission. He thought, wow, this is, you know, business is quite straightforward. And then he never got any more work after that. And then he got more and more depressed, and his mother was clearly not very happy, because, you know, she couldn't see where he was going. And one of the greatest successes of working with this young guy was that he decided not to carry on as an entrepreneur, and he went to use his skills. He was very good in his IT work, was very good, and he went to work for. He left home. He, you know, he went to live with his partner. He got a job, and then he did his graphic design work alongside the job that he'd got. So he used his skills as in IT. And then I got a message from him one day. You know, they got married, and it was a happy end to the story. But that's, you know, but sometimes in mentoring, you have this thing of expect the unexpected. You don't know how you don't really, you can't predict how things are going to turn out. What really is important is you know, is the way that it's viewed by, you know, by the young person that you're working with. Does it meet with their, you know, the kind of picture of success that they're looking for? And for Tim it did, and Sue, who I mentioned earlier, you know, she developed her clothes design business, and nothing gave a greater success than, you know, when she was called forward to London to work at a very prestigious college to help the design students. So as well as, you know, and they wanted her there because she was just such a good such a good clothes designer. And she branched off into, you know, so as well as the expensive design products she had, she went into a kind of more accessible price range. She, you know, she was a good photographer, so she would sell photography. She did handmade paintings, or handmade paper, I should say. She had something unique about her clothes design, where she would take natural um, natural produce from the world around us, things like onions or beetroots or plants, and create dyes. And then she would use those dyes with, the wool that she had. And we, part of the support we had for her was we were able to support her with with one of the latest knitting machines, automated knitting machines, and she was off and running. She was terrific. Worked so hard for her success, because she had always had to work so hard for her success. So there's a couple of stories. So you can see, so you've got Tim, and you've got Sue, you've got Tom, you've got Bill. You've got young guys that are that are taking these challenges on, as it were. And for me, as the mentor, gives me great pride when I see them succeed in the in the way that it's important for them.
Yeah, okay. So among all of those four people that you mentioned, I believe Tim's story is quite a unique one, because what we have seen in many cases is that sometimes we force entrepreneurship on someone for the young people, like, hey, you have to be entrepreneur. These are the route to success for being an entrepreneur. But your role as a mentor was more to know, like, myself, who am I, what is my definition of success, and how I can get into that road, how I can make my a life that is worth living. So that is a very interesting perspective. So, and reflecting on this, I would like to know that you have an amazing experience, like, a well lot of experience on mentoring. So what are the key skills and qualities that a mentor should possess if he or she wants to be a successful mentor?
Key quality. Okay. Oh goodness. I mean, that's. I mean, for me, the top ones is that. I mean, the first one is that the mentee chooses you. You don't choose the mentee. And so we sometimes talk about the first meeting or so being a chemistry meeting. Can you get on well together? And it's really important in that first meeting, to talk about how you're going to work together, to talk about expectations, to talk about the kind of boundaries, and creating a kind of contract. I don't know how long your mentors and mentees work for. Nowadays 12 months is quite normal, I think. So if you're going to work together for in a relationship for a year, you want to be pretty clear in the outset that that you're going to get on together. So I think that's the first thing, is in terms of the mentee chooses you. I mean, what I try to bring to the table is I like this notion of what we call connection before content. So and what I mean by that is during that kind of early part of getting to know each other, I like to share my the things I like. So behind me in the bookshelf here, I've got some sports books, I've got some cookery books. So sport and cooking, two of my passions. I've got my record collection here. Music is another one of my passions. So I like to find out from my mentee what are their passions. And so when we meet, then we have some conversation first before we're actually getting into, so what do you want to talk about today, what's on your agenda. I think that connection is important. I think particularly around if that chemistry is going to work, I think I hope I try to bring some, a degree of calmness, because being an entrepreneur is a really, really tough job. I mentioned earlier from the hotel, I mean, I experienced some stressful times there. I think that if I can at least stay calm, if I can, be a good listener and ask questions, and not as I'm doing now in our conversation, but I am an extrovert, and I have to turn the situation around so that 70% of what's said in any meeting I have with a mentee, 70% actually comes from my mentee. And what I'm doing is facilitating, is guiding, the process, in order that, that what's important for me is to ask the questions that help me to get clarity of what is happening, what is the picture, or what is the story of the person that's in front of me. Can I get clarity? Can I then work with that to find out what the challenges are, so we can then work with those challenges. The answers are always, the answers will always, and the decision making, and the actions and the answers need to come. They need to be owned, and they need to come from my mentee. I can add some things, but I would always ask permission first. So if my mentee wants to, if they want some of my ideas, then I will ask permission. I usually say something like, well, is it okay if I offer some of my thoughts here? And, it gives them an opportunity to say yes or no to that. So that connection, the calmness that I spoke about, I think it's really, really important that I show absolute commitment to what I'm doing. I mentioned Sue earlier. One of the things I learned from Sue was that I had my consultancy work at the same time. And I remember once, I remember not, on more than one occasions overrunning with a client, and that was my paid work. And so I was late for turning up to meet Sue. And on this one occasion, I could see that she was really, really, I could see it in her facial expression. She was disappointed, I was late. And so when we reviewed, we used to review our relationship from time to time. And I said, Sue, how's this relationship working for you? She said, it's great. She said, but sometimes it's a bit disappointing if we're due to meet at this time, and if you're running late, or if I hadn't heard from you. That feedback really stuck with me hugely. It made me realize that whether I'm doing paid work or non-paid work, it's both equal. The commitment is totally, it has to be absolutely, no difference between a paid client or my voluntary work. They both have to have the absolute same disciplined approach from me. And that came from my mentee. She taught me that. And so nowadays, in terms of, because I think one of the other qualities, I think, mentors have their different ways of doing things. And so having a kind of disciplined, my discipline is, runs a bit like this. I mean, number one, we, at the end of every meeting, we agree the time of the date and time of the next meeting. And this is something I've learned from my current mentor. We never, ever change our arrangements. We might, over 2 years, and we meet once a month, over the last 2 years, we might have shifted that twice, maybe. That's 2 out of 24 meetings. That's pretty good going, I think. But we absolutely make sure that we pay 100% attention to the commitment we've made. So at the end of a meeting, I fix the next meeting, and then when and then I usually ask for the person's agenda up front. So, just what's, the kind of things they might want to talk about. And so they'll, day before, they'll send me a WhatsApp or an email, whatever it might be. And given that most of my work since COVID is online, I mean, that's really helpful. I mean, it helps me to, just do some thinking around the topic areas that my mentee wants to talk about. And the other thing that I then do while I'm, because it's online, and one of the things I tend to do is I don't make notes from everything that's said, but I use a mind mapping type approach. And so I capture some things, and at the end of the meetings, I will ask for the person to. Now it's really important they're taking ownership at the end what the actions are going to be. So I ask them to summarize, what are the important things that have come out of the meeting. Ask them to summarize that, and then ask them to tell me what their actions are going to be. And so we have this kind of discipline, this rhythm of how the meetings work. And my online meetings tend to last for an hour. And then I ask permission. I say, well, would it be helpful if I send you my mind map? Another one of my mentors used to do this, and so when I was talking, they, some of the notes that were there, that would be sent to me, and I could either choose to look at that and just remind myself of what was said. And nowadays it's technology so easy. I'll just take as we're finishing the call, I'll just take a photograph on my phone, WhatsApp that through. They can, they've got it. They say, oh, that's great. They see the words that they've been using, and it's a kind of good reminder for them. And I think it helps to I think it kind of helps them with that commitment to their actions, just seeing their words there. It gives them the kind of encouragement to want to say, yeah, I'm going to go for, I will do my best here. I can go for that. And then we'll carry on, and then the next meeting we'll check in, how they're doing with their progress. So in terms of your question around skills and qualities, I think I've picked out a few points here, but I have this kind of rhythm, this discipline type approach. I talked about listening. Another great somebody who's had a great influence is Professor Bob Garvey. He's one of our he advises YBI, or helps us a lot with our thinking around mentoring. And and one of his things, actually, we were talking about getting started with a mentee, and his thing is number one, work with whoever turns up. In other words, whatever mentee turns up that day, whatever mood or whatever shape they're in, work with that. So work with whoever turns up, whoever's in the room, as it were. And then his second thing is work with what is said. So whatever is said, you work with that. So work with with whoever turns up, and work with then what's said. And I think that's brilliant, because you don't have, you're not preconditioned for the questions you're necessarily going to ask. You're very spontaneous to and alert to to the person that's there with you.
Okay, yeah, it's quite interesting. Like, the few points that I have picked from here is like disciplined approach. No matter whether this is a paid service that you are giving or the voluntary mentoring, this is a commitment. And when I'm saying this is a commitment, it should be as disciplined and as possible, so that both parties benefit from this kind of relationship, which I believe is very important. And another thing is being spontaneous, and being spontaneous at times may make us vulnerable, but I believe that is okay, because the vulnerability, this is what makes us human. Because sometimes mentee or other people put a unrealistic expectation on a mentor that you have to know everything. Man, you are a mentor. You have to know everything. So from there, it is very important, I believe, that having that spontaneous mindset, and whatever comes up, take it from there. So yeah, so thank you for reflecting on those issues. So like as an ESO, like entrepreneurship support organization, I was wondering whether you have any advice, like how do we evaluate our existing process of mentoring and mentor mentee matching, and how do we develop from there, right? If there is any framework to to do the evaluation.
Yeah, I think, well, this, I mean, what you've touched on here is the importance of the third person in the relationship. So, so you've got the mentor, you've got the mentee, but then you've got the mentoring coordinator or the mentoring manager representing the organization, and all three parties together are vital for the success of mentoring. And so yeah, we work a lot in YBI in our, what we call our 10 steps approach. And so when we're teaching, when we're or working with organizations to adopt a mentoring approach, then, the key things really is who do you employ to be a volunteer mentor? So looking at your recruitment and selection procedures, bringing in the people that you want to be part of your community. And I mentioned when I 25 years ago in the Prince's Trust, it was really interesting. We had we used to look at our mentors, and we coined this phrase called they were the 3M mentors group, and the 3M mentoring group was male, middle class, and mature. So it's a bit like me, really. So you imagine a whole room of just me. It's not. We need greater diversity than that, because our clients, our mentees are are come in all kind of shapes, sizes, colors, and backgrounds, and so and skills and talents. So I think we need this kind of diversity. It's really, really, really important, I think. So that started to change, and so I think for organizations that are recruiting, they've got choices. Do they recruit from their, from the corporates that are part of their, maybe their funding partners? Do they recruit from business schools? Do they recruit from retired people? Do they recruit from the communities where the mentees are? Do they recruit from proven entrepreneurs? Richard Branson's Virgin organization, they have a youth entrepreneurship program, and they have a rule, and that is you cannot be a mentor unless you either have been or you are an entrepreneur. So they have this rule, absolute rule. If you don't fit that, you don't get past the selection process. Simple. So selection's important, I think. And then I think what we learned from another brilliant professor worked with us, David Clutterbuck, Professor Clutterbuck. He helped YBI in the early days to look at the formal mentoring program, and that was really around 3-stage approach, which was the way you set up the mentoring relationship, the way you maintain the relationship, the way you exit from the relationship. And we built this into our induction training, and so that stood the test of time for many, many years now, where we apply a formal approach, and at the end of that, then usually the mentor mentees are then matched for usually around a year. And as well as training the mentors, we also train the mentees. And one of the things we've learned is that a mentee needs to be ready for a mentor. Not every mentee is ready. And so the whole bit about readiness is a very important concept, so that, you bringing forward the mentor, they've come through the training program, they're ready to go. Equally, that mentee needs to be, they need to be at that point in their entrepreneurial journey that they're going to benefit from the mentor as well. So it's not about mentoring for everyone. It's about bringing them together to that point where you've got the greater opportunity for success. Then if you do that, you're into matching. And matching is, we usually talk about matching is an inexact science. So there's no guarantees. That's why the chemistry meeting is important to, sometimes we call it the no fault divorce. So if, for example, if it doesn't work out, it's okay to go to the mentoring coordinator, whether you're the mentor or the mentee, and say, I don't think this is going to work out. It's okay to do that. And I do like it actually when organizations, when they match more on values rather than the type of business. Because if you've got shared values, then you've got at least a decent chance that you're going to work well together. And so I think from matching, I think it's good that, that the mentor fills out, that they fill out a kind of profile, and there's a profile of the mentee. And then, which is really about, the mentors talking about kind of things that they can offer as a mentor, and the mentees talking about the kind of things that they want. And I think that then when you start to match those things together, when you, as the organization, then you're looking to create the best match from the information that you've got. But it is an inexact science. But I think if you've got good selection, good recruitment selection, good training, match people at the point of readiness, match on values. And the other thing you mentioned earlier, Rashed, was that sometimes the mentees, and that's why their training is important, sometimes they think that the mentors can do everything. Well, they can't. They really, really can't. Some mentors are just brilliant in HR or, from a consultancy background, maybe. Some come from a finance background. Some are brilliant at branding and marketing. Some are brilliant at, at operations. But it's very difficult to have all of the great skills. And so that's, again, when the third person comes into play, because it's all right to go back to the organization and say, we're stuck at this point. Is there an expert? Is there somebody working for the organization that can help in this particular area? And I think that's a good thing. That's about being open and not trying to kind of stumble your way through because it's expected of you, but just simply say, actually, I can, this is the limit of my expertise. And I know I've got colleagues that have got greater knowledge in some of these areas than me. Let's see if we can tap into some knowledge from others as well. I think that brings me into another point, which is knowing your, really talking here about knowing your boundaries. And mentoring is brilliant in terms of helping people move forward, have this picture of success that, that they want to work towards, and moving forward. Sometimes people get, sometimes there's issues where they get stuck, and sometimes people need a different type of support. It might be counseling support, and mentors aren't necessarily, they're not counselors, they're not therapists, unless they've got that qualification. But I think it's important to know where the boundaries are. And again, if they come up against, really difficult situations, personal, some heavy personal situations, is to then bring their their coordinator into play there, and not delve into areas that they're not qualified to work in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what I understand, there are actually a lot of variables in this whole mentor-mentee matching process and running this process successfully. So, with all these variables, I believe it's also important to acknowledge that mentoring is not an easy thing. So, while we say it is a great stuff, but the chances of failure is really high.
Mhm.
So, may I ask you if there is any failure story in your life, being a mentor, or still you believe that you could have done better or done something else? So, would you please share a story like that?
Yeah, I will, and then I hope that we can just talk about the importance of monitoring as well, actually, because once you've released, once you've said goodbye to your mentor or mentee, it is important to continue to stay in contact,
Mm.
so that so before things get really tricky and beyond a point that you can do anything about, that through a good monitoring process and that you can deal with it. Personal story for me was, I mentioned the hotel that I ran all those years ago, and I had two jobs, and I used to be there at weekends. Weekends, the hotel was always full, the restaurant was full, and I just thought that was because it was the weekend, and we were losing money in the week. But even when it was in the season, we should have been doing better. And I remember staying up after service one weekend and talking to the head chef, and I said, I just can't work out why we are losing money this is peak season, why we're losing money in during the week, and yet we're turning people away at the weekends. And he said he said um he said well, what happens, he said, when you're not here, he said, is he said your partner, um when the booking comes in for during the week, quite often the front of house and your partner will say, I'm sorry, we're full. Even though we're not full, they will say, I'm sorry, we're full. Now, I could not believe this. I thought, hang on a minute, are you telling me that we're turning away business? And he said, yeah, he said, that's what's happening. And we needed that money in order that, when we got to the winter season and we didn't have a lot of bookings, we had money in the bank to see our way through. And I was totally shocked, and it kind of made me realize that there were things that I could have, that thinking about it, this goes to the heart of, the relationships within the business itself, and how much I'd got those things wrong, and until it came to a point where something had to happen. And I was, yeah, I could not believe that that situation had arisen. But it was, but I was very much, I was very much 50% responsible for the business with my partner, and yet I didn't spot what was going on. And that really, really hurt at the time. I hope I've learned from that now, that if I see things that are not quite right, is to tackle them early, is to not let things go when they don't seem to be right, is to raise them as issues and talk about them. I hope I've learned that.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that you it happened. Okay, it's a very difficult lesson you had to swallow. So, as I understand, like probably all of the countries are going through a very difficult economic times, and getting good jobs and everything is becoming difficult. So unemployment and underemployment is increasing, which also means that there is an increasing necessity of youth being in entrepreneurship, and that also increases the requirement of having good mentors in the pool, having good mentor pool for regardless of the country we're in. So when you go into this process, in this kind of process, the question that comes in, the many people who are supposedly are talented enough to do good mentoring, they ask, hey, what's in it for me as a volunteer mentor?
Mhm.
So how do we tackle this kind of notion? Or we don't
Um,
tackle it, we let it go?
well, I think the again, I mean, it's a great question, and I think that um, I've been since for the last 25 years, I've been working in communities, and I at this kind of looking back now from at the age I am, I think that there's a huge responsibility that that we take care of our communities, and so that we all have a responsibility to that. It's very difficult to build strong communities unless we're willing to be to actively participate as well. And I mentioned at the beginning, I could only give 10% at the beginning. Now I can give more time, but but at least I was able to actively participate with and commit 10%. And I think that that kind of helps with when we when we do our outreach work. We do outreach work for for young people who want to be entrepreneurs. I think outreach works in just the same way for volunteer mentors. We have to go and find the message that gets people to be really excited that they want to be part of part of a project. They want to be part of a community. They want to be able to to know that they can offer their their strengths, and and be rewarded for that. And they're not rewarded financially, but you can reward volunteers. You can reward them with recognition. You can reward them with network, with getting them together every now and again, and you can reward them with the networking and being part of the movement, and you can reward them with they might start off as a mentor, as I did, and then they carry on, and they're involved with running the training programs, or they might do some of the marketing for the organization. So it's kind of trying to find ways of engaging volunteers in the community and to be part of your program. Because when you engage with a volunteer, they don't just mentor the first person. When they exit that relationship, then you're looking to rematch them. And if they start off with one mentee, next time they might mentor two mentees, and then they might bring other friends along as well who also want to be mentors. So you're building up this virtuous cycle, as it were. And so so it is really, I think it's really, really important. We can't, when you think about the fact that mentors come for free, they're doing this work, and yet you don't have to pay them a salary. It is just I think it's just a brilliant model, in terms of the way that people are willing to give, but they have to be part of the movement, part of the brand, part of the organization. They have to feel as if they're really included, and that means you've got to pay attention to the volunteers. And so sometimes programs fail because they don't pay attention to the volunteers. They take them for granted. And so having the as as we do, we talk about the 10 steps program, as well as monitoring. We talk about motivation of both the mentor and the mentee. And, we have a whole suite of advanced mentoring webinars, aimed specifically at offering more tools and techniques to the mentors to use with their mentees. This is even, gives even more opportunity to, for them to be part of the program.
Yeah, I believe when we're like, let's say in a different world, we are paying money for the mentoring, and that is a very limiting thing, because if I'm paying money for a great
Yeah.
help, for great thing for mentoring, it means I am actually devaluing, because everything, all the
Mm.
relation cannot be like converted into money. Like, I am not paying money to my mother, I am not paying money to my parents, I am not making money to my kid. So sometimes I believe these kind of relationships go beyond just
Yeah.
few buckets of money and those materialistic things. So yeah, that's a great word of wisdom. Thank you very much. So I wish we could go longer. I know you have another calls and everything. So
Yeah.
my last question is that, John Cull, you are a parent, you are a grandparent, you are a husband, you are a mentor, you are a friend. So combining all the identities that you have gone through in your life, you are still enjoying some of those identities. What would be
Mhm.
your parting advice for the mentors who are coming in future generation, who are still in mentoring and who are still wondering, oh, what's in it for me?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I learned. I'm glad you asked that, because one of the greatest gifts, I think, came from my mother. And she, when I said to her, I said, well, I've become a mentor. She said, well, what does that involve? And I said, well, I have to kind of ask questions. I have to listen, be a good listener. And she said, my goodness, she said, you like to talk. She said, remember what I've always said to you. She said, you've got two ears and one mouth, and use them in that proportion. And I thought, well, that's great advice. But the other things that she taught me was that the first thing that you do is that you turn up. That the commitment that I mentioned, you turn up and be, and to be present there with your, with your mentees. So you absolutely need to turn up. And because we don't know exactly what's going to happen in that 1 hour, the thing that I love to do is, so turn up. The second one is to tune in. So tune into what's happening that day. And with it, and I'll leave it with a little bit of fun. Actually, the third one is let the magic begin, because magic does happen. And it happens when you see the enthusiasm on the face of your mentee, and the way that they are then, that they then want to get on with the things that they're saying is important to them, the actions they want to progress. And then when you meet up again and you see that things are progressing, then it makes it all absolutely worthwhile. And so turning up, tuning in, and let the magic begin. So I think I'll just end with that.
Thank you very much, John. It's so like amazing to have you today, and I wish, again, I am saying that I wish we could continue our conversation for a bit long, but thank you very much for your time, and I am really grateful for the entire conversation we had. I hope this is helpful not just for me, as I kept saying that the whole podcast, I took this initiative to learn from the best of the best. So this is sort of a me getting mentored by my different guests whose work I really admire. I believe this chatting, our conversation is helpful for other people, for the mentees, for the mentors, for the yesos. So hopefully we catch up soon with
Yes,
different
we are.
topic.
Yes, thank you, Rashed, and thank you for allowing space for for me to talk about the passion in my life, which is mentoring. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah. So take care. Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot. Bye bye.